Hello and welcome back to T-Level Tactics for T-Level Digital Support Services. We're on our first topic for Root Core 1 business context, which is Organisation Types. Now, if you're signed up to the Patreon, then make sure you head on there and grab the task sheet, as that will give you activities that will match the learning that we're doing in this video. So, what we're going to be looking at is, we're going to identify types of businesses and organisations. We're going to compare the characteristics of different types of organisations, and also explain how different types of organisations, well, how that might impact their implementation of digital technologies. Before we get started properly, just a bit of a disclaimer. First of all, T-Level Tactics videos are not endorsed or sponsored by any education institution or qualification awarding body. They also should not be used as a replacement to any classroom learning you might be receiving, because discussion and practical activities with your peers and lecturer will help to expand your thinking and comprehension. Instead, these materials should best be used as preparation material or revision to reinforce learning. Also to note, these videos cover the same content and required knowledge for Root Core 1 of the T-Level Digital Business Services course. However, we're going to contextualize it more towards IT support roles. Okay, let's get started with that first aim. Different organisation types. Well, most businesses and organisations are going to fit into one of these three categories: public, private, and voluntary. Now, I'm sure you can think of a few yourself, but let's take a look at some examples. For public organisations, in the UK, we've got organisations like the BBC, GCHQ, DEFRA, the Environment Agency, the NHS, and the Office for National Statistics. There are others, of course, but these are just some examples that I wanted to give. Private organisations, these might be a little bit more recognisable. Businesses like Amazon, Google, Electronic Arts, Intel, Microsoft, Valve, Nvidia, and AMD. And then in the voluntary sector, remember, these are organisations in the United Kingdom: Cancer Research UK, National Trust, Mind, the Alzheimer's Society, Samaritans, Tech UK, Wavelength, and GamesAid. You might want to do a bit of research on those. Now, I know that's been a really short section, but we have come to our first task already if you're a Patreon member. It's just a little bit of research. It'll only take you about 10 minutes. But if you are a member, head on there, get the task sheet, have a go at that first task. As I said, it's only 10 minutes. It's just a little bit of research to have a look at some more organisations. Pause the video here, spend some time on that, then come back and we'll carry on. Okay, let's take a look at what makes these organisations different. Why do we have those three different categories, and what does it mean to be a public, private, or voluntary organisation? These organisations all operate in different ways, and in the United Kingdom, they're all bound by different rules. They'll all have very different objectives to each other as well. Let's take a look at those public organisations first of all. Now, public sector organisations are often funded by and operated by the government. One exception on our list of examples here is the BBC. They do operate independently, but they are funded by the government in the form of a TV licence. Funding for the other organisations on our examples list will come from taxes such as value-added tax, income tax, fuel tax, and more. Public sector organisations will operate on a not-for-profit basis and aim to provide the best value for the taxpayers' money. Private organisations are different. They're often funded and run by individuals, or they could be funded and run by investors, depending on how this organisation's set up. Funding can come from cash you already have, or from investments or loans from banks, for example. Private organisations will usually aim to generate a profit for their owners and investors, essentially making more money than what they put in. Private organisations can be set up and structured in a number of different ways. Remember, this is in the UK, and it might be different if you're watching from elsewhere. You could set up a private business as a sole trader by yourself. And in this type of business, you can keep all your profit, after you've paid the tax man, of course. But it does mean that you're responsible for all the finances and assets in the business. This means that if you were to go into negative equity, then any other property that you own could be sacrificed in order to pay for any losses. You could also go into business with someone else as a business partnership. This is similar to a sole trader, but just where there's multiple people who have invested in the business. They'll take equal share of profit, depending on how you've agreed it, and responsibility for the business as well. Now, you can also set businesses up as limited liability companies or limited liability partnerships if there's multiple people involved. This separates the business from your personal assets. It means that if you incur any losses, then it's limited only to assets owned by the business. If you want to, you could set up as a private limited company instead. Similar to a limited liability company, this means the business is an individual entity, but private limited companies can issue shares to raise additional funds. Private limited companies must also register with something called Companies House in the UK, and they must pay corporation tax. People who own shares in a private limited company will earn profits in the form of dividends. You can also set up a public limited company. This is similar to a private limited company. However, the shares can be publicly traded on a stock exchange, like the London Stock Exchange, for example. Public limited companies must publish financial data for scrutiny, and it means that people who might invest in the business can make sure that it's solvent and making money and it's going to be good for them, rather than investing in something where they could very quickly lose their money. Again, shareholders in public limited companies will earn profits in the form of dividends. Private businesses in the UK can also be further categorised. You could have, for instance, a small or medium enterprise, otherwise known as an SME. This is a recognised status in the United Kingdom, and this is for businesses that have less than 250 employees and a turnover of less than £50 million per financial year. Small businesses are likely to be sole traders, partnerships, or limited liability companies, whereas medium-sized businesses are more likely to be partnerships or limited liability partnerships and not sole traders. If you go over that 250 employee limit, or you turn over more than £50 million a year, you're likely to be classed as a large enterprise instead. And this is where you're more likely to find those private limited companies or public limited companies. You can also find non-governmental organisations, and these businesses are often not-for-profit, pursuing social or political goals instead, and can be of any size, from community-focused to international groups. This is where, for instance, a college might come in. This is where they're not looking to make a profit. All money is reinvested in the organisation, but they're separate to the government. Let's move on to the final sector, voluntary. The voluntary sector is sometimes known as the third sector, and this is where we find two different types of organisation. We can have not-for-profit, and we can also have charities. Now, in not-for-profit organisations, all income or profit generated is reinvested back into the organisation. They're often membership-based, and they could have paid employees, so it's not all voluntary work. And not-for-profits can also sell goods and services for profit, but remember, those profits are all reinvested back in the business, and they're not paid out in dividends to any shareholders or investors. Not-for-profits are usually community-focused groups or clubs. For example, a community football team might be a not-for-profit. Charities work slightly differently. A charity is a specific organisation status in the United Kingdom, and they operate for societal benefit. All profits are reinvested back in the charity, so they can still sell goods and sell products, but all the money goes back in. Charities are controlled by a board of trustees, and these are people who are trusted to make decisions for the charity, lead it in the right direction, ensure it's acting responsibly. Charities in the United Kingdom are regulated by the Charity Commission, and they have to follow specific UK charity law. And this is because charities with that status are eligible for things like tax relief and exemptions, for instance, from their trading profits, any investment income, and if they sell any assets, such as property, for instance. Charities can also claim tax back via gift aid for any donations. So if you go to a charity shop and you buy something, the item that you purchase might have been gift aided, which allows that shop to claim back any tax, any VAT. Okay, so we've quickly gone through those 3 different types of organizations. Let's have a quick summary of that. First of all, we looked at public organizations that were often funded by and operated by the government. Private organizations that are funded and run by individuals and aim to make a profit. And also voluntary organizations, sometimes known as the third sector, that have not-for-profit and charities, remembering that charities are a protected status. Okay, now if you're a Patreon member, this is a good time to take a look at task 2. So head back to the task sheet and complete that second task. This one will take you a little bit longer, I think about 20 minutes. So this is a good time to pause the video, have a go at that task, and then come back for the final bit of content. Okay, let's move on. So digital technologies in organizations are essential. It's almost impossible to create a business that doesn't use some form of IT. But different organizations are going to have different resources available to them. Not all businesses will use or be able to access the same technology. But why not? Let's take a look at private organizations first. Private businesses, you can take profits, but they can also reinvest them back into the business. And large businesses are going to have huge amounts of money to use for this. Let's look at an example. Amazon are worth $1.9 trillion as of this recording and constantly implement new technologies to improve their profit margins. Things like robotics, things like automated systems. Competition in businesses also leads to more regularly updating equipment and technology to keep a leading edge against competitors. There's a reason here why businesses want the latest and greatest things so that they can make things quicker and more efficient. And that investment in technologies can lead to additional profits or cost savings. Now, in the public sector, this is where things can get a bit tricky. Of course, we still want the latest and greatest, but remember, public organizations often have that funding from the government. Sometimes it can be quite limited by that funding. In turn, that funding is limited by any taxes collected by the government. This means they can be quite constrained by their budget, but also by the financial practices they must use when they purchase things. For instance, they can't just go out and buy anything, certainly not for large projects anyway. Public organizations must prove they're using the money to provide value to the taxpayer. So this means that you can't just go for a specific brand of something because you know it's trustworthy and you like it. You often have to gather a number of quotes and pick what is going to provide the best value for money to the taxpayer. Now, this process is known as putting out to tender. And this means that private businesses can then offer quotes or bids on that tender to fulfill the requirements. Sometimes these bids and these tenders can mean public organizations are tied to a specific brand for a certain amount of time. It could be that they are tied to a specific company for a few years for all of their IT devices in the organization. Finally, the voluntary sector. Now, the voluntary sector often rely on donations and grants, which means they can make very little profit to reinvest back into themselves. Any investment that voluntary organizations make needs to be approved by that board of trustees. And you're going to be budget limited when they're buying any new technology. They're going to be relying upon whatever money they've created from donations or that they've been able to get from those grants. They may also have to rely on technology that's been donated, for instance through sponsorships or otherwise. So that's a bit of a look at how digital technologies can be different between different organization types. And again, this is another chance for Patreon members to head back to that task sheet and have a go at the final task on their implementation. So head back there, have a go at the third task. This one is a little bit longer again, but it's going to get you thinking more. It's going to take roughly 30 to 45 minutes. So, in this video, we've identified different types of businesses and organizations, compared the characteristics of these different organizations, and how to think about how the type of organization might impact how they implement digital technologies. Now, hopefully, all of this means that you might be ready to have a go at this exam-style question. If you're not, don't worry. Watch a few more videos, come back and give it a go at a later time. Here we go. Using examples, compare the goals and aims of private and public organizations and how this may impact their implementation and use of technology. There are 4 marks up for grabs here, so I'd recommend spending no more than 4 or 5 minutes coming up with an answer. You'll also be looking to make about 4 points in your answer as well. So you can compare private and public organizations and get 2 marks there, and also make 2 points on how it can impact their implementation of technology, getting you those 4 marks in total. Now that brings us to the end of this video. I just want to say thank you for watching. If you're not a member of the Patreon, go and sign up there. And if you're enjoying this and you're finding it helpful, subscribe to the channel so you can keep up to date with any new videos. In the next video, we'll be looking at our next topic, which is going to be stakeholders. Thank you again. Thanks for watching and see you next time.